America's top diplomat says US President Donald Trump is determined to end the war in Ukraine, quote, as soon as possible. In a call with Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Marco Rubio said all sides must take steps to secure a sustainable peace. Trump is threatening Russia with new sanctions and tariffs after its latest attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
Valentina Lidovska fled her own home in Kharkiv's front line when it was destroyed. But the war has caught up with her here at her son's house.
I don't know what to do now. I don't know what to do or what to say. Thank God the weather is nice, it's warm. I'm 81 years old, it should have just killed me and it would all be over. But as you can see...
Rescue workers evacuated another elderly woman from a nearby building, the latest residential area to be hit by Russian strikes. Recent drone and missile attacks on Ukraine's port city of Odessa also destroyed dozens of homes and targeted its energy infrastructure too, leaving swathes of the city without electricity. The latest round of airstrikes by Russia come after the US cut all its military aid to Ukraine. On Friday, US President Trump said both the parties should come to the negotiating table, but also hinted at not being too happy with Ukraine.
We're doing very well with Russia, but right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine. And I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now.
On his Truth social platform, the US president wrote that he's strongly considering sanctions and tariffs on Russia in hopes of forcing a settlement to the war in Ukraine. Ukraine's president said that communication with Washington was ongoing.
Today, throughout the day, the most intensive work to date has been ongoing with President Trump's team at various levels, with many phone calls. The agenda is clear. Peace as soon as possible, security as reliable as possible. Ukraine is committed to the most constructive approach.
The US president looks to set keep both Ukraine and Russia guessing as to his next move in the days to come.
Let's get more now on this from DW Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert, who's joining us in Vilnius. Konstantin, Europe and the US have been imposing sanctions on Russia again and again because of its war in Ukraine. Are Trump's threats of new sanctions and also tariffs going to make any difference now?
Well, Monica, I think these sanctions could make a difference in case they're imposed. Russia gets most of its money, most of its income from selling oil, to a slightly lesser extent gas, and, for example, massively sanctioning the so-called shadow tanker fleet, or actually threatening secondary sanctions on those who buy Russian commodities could be very effective. But these sanctions really must be massive. This is something that the previous administration avoided, and this is something that so far the Trump administration avoided. Definitely massive economic pressure could be very hurtful to the Kremlin.
So we heard that there is this meeting coming up in Saudi Arabia in the coming days. Will we see the Russian side to actually try and make peace? Can Putin afford to keep fighting?
I think, I would say, I doubt that Putin is ready for any kind of quick concessions. First of all, he sees that so far the American administration was rather displeased with Ukraine and trying to pressure, first and foremost of all, Ukraine. That suits Putin fine. Secondly, my understanding is that these sanctions that we discussed, Monica, absent, Putin thinks he can continue to fight. His economy is fueled by essentially money being printed and immediately poured into the private sector, producing everything and anything for the war effort. He still thinks he can have enough recruits for the front without massive mobilization. Massive mobilization is a big problem for him potentially because it could signify social and potentially political unrest against his regime. So far, my understanding is that Moscow is prepared to continue fighting and prepared to ignore threats from Washington unless these threats materialize.
The Kremlin, though, at the same time says that there is a possible basis for a peace deal with Ukraine. Do you know more about that?
Well, yes, we do know that the Russians are saying they would like to go back to the so-called Istanbul agreements of spring 2022 immediately after the full-scale invasion happened. There are many versions of what actually these agreements reached by the Russian-Ukrainian delegations with mediators signify. One thing for sure, it means that Ukraine is not going to join NATO. That, I think, is more or less what Washington is also talking about. But on the other hand, General Kellogg, who is the point man, the White House's point man on Ukraine and Russia talks, said, I think yesterday, that these agreements reached in Istanbul, which also included all sorts of conversations about security guarantees and things like that, these agreements cannot serve as a basis for future settlements. So we have very contradictory signals. But to me, one thing for sure, that no Ukraine in NATO is going to be a very significant, if not the top point in all these negotiations.
All right, DW Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert in Vilnius. Konstantin, thank you so very much.
Thank you.